I am Joshua, 33 years old, and my own family forged legal documents to steal my $5 million house while I was out of the country. Before I tell you about the absolute federal nightmare I dropped on their heads, let me know where you are watching from in the comments. I pulled my suitcase up the steep, perfectly paved driveway of my Malibu home. I was utterly exhausted. I had just spent 2 weeks in Geneva running a grueling financial audit on a multinational shipping company. As a senior forensic accountant, my life is a blur of spreadsheets, hidden offshore accounts, and corporate fraud. Coming back to the scent of the Pacific Ocean and the eucalyptus trees on my property was the only thing keeping me going. I reached the heavy mahogany front door, slid my custom key into the brass deadbolt, and pushed. Nothing. I jiggled the key. It didn't even turn. I looked closely at the metal casing. The entire lock mechanism had been completely replaced. A cold knot formed in my stomach, but my panic was interrupted when I looked down to my right. 6 cheap, flimsy cardboard boxes were stacked recklessly on my pristine front lawn, right next to the active sprinkler heads. I walked over and unzipped the top box. Inside were my college diplomas, my winter coats, and, to my absolute horror, the wooden urn containing my grandfather's ashes. It was just casually tossed in there right next to a pair of muddy running shoes. Taped to the outside of the box was a handwritten note. I instantly recognized the messy, loopy handwriting. It belonged to my older brother, Elijah. The note read, "We are doing this because we love you. Please get some help." I didn't scream. I didn't drop to my knees and cry. When you spend your entire career tracking down millions of dollars, hidden by ruthless corporate embezzlers, you learn to detach your emotions instantly. I pulled out my phone and sent a quick text to my corporate lawyer, David. They took the bait. File everything now. Just as I hit send, the new deadbolt clicked from the inside. The door swung open, revealing Elijah standing in the foyer of my own home. He was wearing a ridiculously expensive tailored maroon blazer and a smug grin that made my blood boil. Standing right behind him were 2 uniformed police officers. Elijah is 35 years old, the undisputed golden child of our family, and a man who loves to call himself a cryptocurrency and real estate entrepreneur. What he usually leaves out of his flashy elevator pitch is his extensive history with federal bankruptcy courts. He was drowning in massive debt, and my unencumbered $5 million asset was just sitting there, tempting him. "Officers, this is exactly what I was telling you about," Elijah said, his voice dripping with fake, sugary concern. "This is my little brother, Joshua. As I explained, he's been going through a severe psychological breakdown. The pressure of his accounting job finally snapped him. My wife and I had to step in and take control of his assets to prevent him from ruining his life. We asked him to vacate the premises weeks ago, but he is clearly not grounded in reality right now." The older of the 2 officers, a man with a graying mustache whose name tag read Matthew, stepped forward. "Sir, I'm going to need to see some identification." I calmly reached into my jacket, pulled out my driver's license, and handed it over. Officer Matthew looked at it, then back at me. "Joshua, your brother here has provided us with notarized documentation showing that you recently transferred the ownership of this property to him. He is asking that we remove you from the premises for trespassing." "Transferred the property?" I asked, keeping my voice dangerously level. "May I please see this documentation?" Elijah eagerly held up a thick manila folder and pulled out a single sheet of heavy stock paper. He held it just close enough for the officers to see the heavy embossed notary seal at the bottom. "It's a standard quitclaim deed," Elijah explained smoothly to the cops. He signed it over to me completely free of coercion before his trip. We are just trying to protect his equity before he squanders it. I looked directly at Elijah's arrogant face. "Tell me something, Elijah. When you and our parents sat down to forge my signature on that deed, what color pen did you use?" Elijah stiffened. The younger officer, Luke, shifted uncomfortably on his feet. "I don't know what you're talking about," Elijah replied loudly, making sure the cops heard him. "You signed it yourself in the kitchen. You used a black ballpoint pen. We all watched you do it." I smiled. A genuine, bright smile. A black ballpoint pen. That is incredibly helpful. Thank you. Elijah's thick eyebrows pulled together in confusion. What is that supposed to mean? As a forensic accountant, my entire professional life revolves around the microscopic details of financial fraud, I said, turning my body so I was addressing the officers as well. Because of the highly sensitive nature of my work, I have a very strict personal protocol. I never, under any circumstances, sign a legally binding document with a black pen. Black ink can be easily photocopied, scanned, and manipulated. I only use a custom-ordered fountain pen with a very specific shade of midnight blue ink. It contains trace elements that make it impossible to replicate on a standard color scanner. The smugness completely vanished from Elijah's face, replaced by a rigid, uncomfortable stillness. His jaw tightened so hard I could see a vein pulsing at his temple. If you present a document to a judge with my supposed signature in basic black ballpoint ink, I continued, any competent forensic document examiner is going to tear it apart. They will look at the chemical composition of the ink. And when they see it's a cheap dollar store pen, they are going to ask our parents under oath why they perjured themselves. You're bluffing? Elijah spat, his voice dropping to a panicked whisper so the cops couldn't hear. You signed it. You're just crazy. Am I? I asked softly. You got sloppy, Elijah. Because you are an arrogant amateur playing a professional's game. I turned my back on him, picked up the box containing my grandfather's ashes, and walked down the long paved driveway toward my car. I could feel his eyes burning into my spine. I knew exactly what he was doing right now. He was staring at that manila folder, wondering if he had just made a fatal error that would land him in prison. He had. But the ink color was just a tiny scratch on the surface of the federal trap I had built for him. I didn't drive to a hotel. I drove straight to the source of the infection, my parents' house. The drive to Calabasas took 30 minutes, but it felt like a lifetime. They lived in an upscale, gated community where everyone hid dark secrets behind perfectly manicured rose bushes. I parked half a block away and walked toward the backyard gate. I could hear upbeat jazz music and the clinking of crystal glasses before I even saw them. I pushed the wooden gate open and stepped onto the sprawling stone patio. It was a picture-perfect Sunday barbecue. My father, Thomas, stood by the stainless steel grill, flipping expensive steaks. My mother, Martha, was pouring champagne into crystal flutes. Sitting on the outdoor sofa was Elijah's wife, Chloe, resting a hand on her pregnant belly and laughing loudly. Hanging across the back deck was a massive handmade banner that read, "Congratulations, Elijah and Chloe, on the new Malibu estate." The sheer audacity made my chest tighten. I didn't storm in screaming. I simply walked across the patio and stood at the edge of the outdoor rug. Chloe saw me first. Her laugh died instantly. The champagne flute slipped from her fingers and shattered on the stone floor. The sound made my mother turn around. Martha froze. Thomas lowered his spatula. The jazz music suddenly felt incredibly loud in the heavy silence. "What are you doing here?" my mother demanded, her voice thick with defensive rage. "I'm just here to admire the decorations," I said, gesturing toward the banner. "Celebrating the theft of your own son's home with steaks and champagne. Did you use my college fund to buy the meat, too?" Martha slammed her champagne bottle onto the granite counter. She marched across the patio, stopping mere inches from my face. Her eyes blazed with furious entitlement. "You listen to me, you ungrateful brat," she hissed, pointing a manicured finger at my chest. "We did what we had to do. You are entirely absorbed in your corporate audits, completely neglecting your real family. Chloe is pregnant. Elijah is building a legacy. You are a selfish, single workaholic who is never even in the country. What do you need a $5 million house for?" So, because I chose to build a career instead of becoming a bankrupt con artist like Elijah, my assets are automatically up for grabs? Is that how the law works in your head, Martha? The use of her first name lit the powder keg. My mother raised her hand and slapped me hard across the left cheek. The crack of her palm echoed sharply over the music. My head snapped to the side. A hot redness blossomed across my jawline. Chloe let out a dramatic gasp, covering her mouth with both hands as if she were the victim of the sudden violence. Thomas didn't intervene. He just watched from the grill, a cold expression on his face, silently endorsing the assault. I slowly turned my head back to look at my mother. I didn't flinch. For my entire life, I had contorted myself to fit their mold, trying to buy their affection with financial support. I paid for their vacations. I funded my father's failed investments. The physical pain of the slap was nothing compared to the profound, icy clarity that settled over my brain. Any lingering shred of familial obligation was instantly incinerated. "You deserved it," Martha spat back, though her hand trembled slightly. "You owe this family. Taking that house is just us collecting on a debt you've ignored for years." I looked past her to my father. "You think signing a forged document clears the ledger? You took my entire future when I was 18 and blew $80,000 of my college fund on an extravagant wedding for Elijah. I had to take out massive student loans and work 3 jobs just to survive, while Elijah was sipping champagne on a honeymoon in Bora Bora that I unknowingly paid for. That money belonged to the family unit," Thomas roared, his face turning an angry shade of purple. He marched over, clutching his spatula like a weapon. "And as the head of the house, I decided where it was best utilized. Elijah needed a proper start to his marriage. You were always smart enough to figure it out on your own. You owe us for raising you. And if you think you can just hire some cheap lawyer to undo this property transfer, you are severely underestimating me." Thomas puffed out his chest with pride. "I spent 40 years as a senior loan officer at one of the largest commercial banks in California. I know exactly how the system works. I called in a favor. An old colleague of mine, a certified notary public, owed me for a promotion I gave him 20 years ago. He was more than happy to stamp the quitclaim deed without you needing to be in the room." I stared at him, genuinely impressed by the magnitude of his arrogance. "You are standing in your backyard, casually confessing to organizing a conspiracy to commit wire fraud, all to cover for Elijah's catastrophic failures. It's not fraud when it's family, Joshua," Thomas countered. "It is wealth redistribution. I am glad you think so highly of your banking connections, Dad," I said softly, stepping backward toward the gate, "because you are going to need every single one of them to explain to a federal judge why you coerced a notary into falsifying real estate documents." I turned around and walked out to the street. I didn't look back. Heavy dark clouds had rapidly gathered over the San Fernando Valley, replacing the afternoon sun with a sudden, violent downpour. I got into my car and locked the doors. The rhythmic drumming of the rain matched the rapid beating of my heart. I reached over to the passenger seat and pulled out my heavy-duty encrypted laptop. When I purchased the Malibu estate, I didn't just install a standard alarm system. I hardwired military-grade microcameras into the smoke detectors, the HVAC vents, and the custom crown molding of every major room. They operated on an independent cellular network. My family thought I was just a boring number cruncher. They had no idea they had just broken into a fortress designed to catch professional criminals. I booted up the laptop and opened the surveillance dashboard. The screen flickered to life, displaying a grid of high-definition video feeds from inside my house. I maximized the feed from my home office. Elijah was pacing back and forth across my vintage Persian rug, holding his cell phone to his ear. His velvet blazer was unbuttoned, and he looked both frantic and deeply excited. The audio feed was crystal clear. "Yes, that is correct," Elijah said into the phone, his voice echoing slightly in the large room. "The property is fully unencumbered. 0 mortgage balance. The estimated appraisal is just over $5 million. I am looking to pull out $4 million in a cash-out refinance, and I need the underwriting expedited." I leaned back in my car seat, listening to the rain and the sound of my brother digging his own grave. A cash-out refinance. It was the oldest, most desperate trick in the playbook for failing real estate brothers. He was using the forged quitclaim deed to claim ownership of the house, and now he was trying to use the house as collateral to borrow $4 million in pure cash from a major lender in New York. No, the previous owner was my younger brother. Elijah lied effortlessly to the loan officer on the phone. It was a family transfer. We kept it entirely off-market. I have the notarized quitclaim deed right here on the desk. Yes, I can upload the PDF to your secure portal right now. He sat down in my leather office chair, placed his laptop on my mahogany desk, and began typing. My cameras captured every keystroke. He was using his own email address from an IP address inside California, sending forged legal documents to a federally insured bank located in New York. The moment he transmitted that forged deed across state lines, he crossed a massive legal threshold. He was actively committing federal wire fraud, aggravated identity theft, and bank fraud. He pumped his fist in the air, completely oblivious to the fact that his victory dance was being recorded and stored on a secure server. He believed that by the end of the week, $4 million of tax-free cash would hit his bank account, allowing him to pay off his furious creditors and keep his fake millionaire lifestyle afloat. But Elijah had completely failed to perform even the most basic due diligence on the property he was stealing. I minimized the video feed and opened a secure virtual private network on my laptop. It was time to make sure Elijah's fraudulent loan application didn't get accidentally rejected by the bank's automated fraud detection software. I needed the cash to hit his account fast, because the federal crime is only fully complete and totally irreversible when the stolen funds officially change hands. My fingers flew across the keyboard. As a senior investigator, I possessed top-tier security clearances that granted me backdoor access to the master databases of almost every major financial institution in the country. It was a tool designed to freeze the assets of international money launderers, but today, I was using it to monitor a domestic parasite. I routed my connection through a secure server and slipped directly into the automated underwriting system of the New York bank Elijah had just called. I located his loan application instantly. It was sitting in a digital queue, flashing yellow. The bank's preliminary fraud detection algorithms had already flagged the submission. A sudden, unrecorded quitclaim deed transferring a $5 million property with zero money changing hands was a massive red flag. Under normal circumstances, this application would have been frozen, kicked back to a human underwriter, and subjected to a rigorous title search. That title search would have immediately exposed my father's fake notary stamp. The loan would have been denied, leaving Elijah empty-handed, but still legally safe from major federal prosecution because no money had actually been stolen yet. I couldn't let that happen. A denied application was a mere inconvenience. I needed a completed felony. I needed them locked into a situation they could never lie their way out of. I accessed the bank's manual override terminal. My screen prompted me for an administrative authorization code. I typed in my credentials. This was the exact moment I could have stopped everything. I could have called the local authorities and had them evicted. It would have been the easy way out. But easy wasn't what my family deserved. I marked the title transfer as verified and classified the fake quitclaim deed as a standard intrafamily conveyance. I systematically disabled the alerts that would have triggered a mandatory manual review by the bank's legal department. Then, I moved my cursor over to the final authorization button. It glowed bright green. Approving this step meant the automated system would rubber stamp the $4 million cash-out refinance. It meant the bank would clear the funds and prepare to wire the money directly into Elijah's personal checking account within 48 hours. I didn't hesitate. I clicked Approve. The yellow flashing warning on his file immediately turned green. The status changed from pending review to cleared for funding. A digital receipt popped up confirming that the wire transfer was scheduled for execution. I closed my laptop. The trap was officially set. 3 days later, my cell phone vibrated across the glass desk of my downtown Los Angeles hotel suite. The caller ID displayed Elijah's name. I let it ring 3 times before answering. "Hello, Elijah," I said, keeping my voice flat. "Joshua." "Hey, man." Elijah breathed heavily into the receiver. "I'm so glad you picked up. Mom and Dad have been so worried about you. Worried enough to steal my grandfather's urn and dump it on the lawn in the rain?" I replied. "Listen, Josh, let's not do this over the phone," he said, shifting into a fake, brotherly tone. "We don't want this to tear the family apart permanently. We want to be generous. We want to help you get back on your feet because we love you, even when you are being impossible." My attorney advised us that the best way to move forward and heal as a real family is to get everything formalized properly so there are no lingering resentments. "We want to offer you a financial settlement to help you secure a nice apartment and pay for therapy. But we have to do it by the book." I knew exactly what they were doing. The $4 million wire transfer had hit Elijah's account that morning. Now that he had the cash, his sleazy lawyer had probably warned him that a forged quitclaim deed could still be challenged in civil court if I decided to sue. They needed me to sign an airtight release of claims, a non-disclosure agreement, and a legal waiver to retroactively legitimize their fraud. They were trying to buy my silence with the very money they had just stolen using my property. "You want me to meet you at a lawyer's office?" I asked, perfectly playing the role of the defeated, exhausted brother. "Tomorrow at 10 in the morning, Elijah instructed, his tone suddenly bossy. "His office is in Beverly Hills. Mom and Dad are going to be there, too. Just come in, sign the paperwork, and we can put all this ugliness behind us." The next morning, I pulled my rental car into the underground parking garage of a shiny glass building in Beverly Hills. I intentionally dressed down, wearing a faded, oversized sweater and slacks, making sure to look every bit the broken scapegoat they desperately needed me to be. When I pushed open the heavy glass door of Conference Room B, the hostile energy was suffocating. My mother Martha and my father Thomas sat rigidly on one side of the massive mahogany table. Chloe sat opposite them, dramatically rubbing her stomach. Elijah stood at the head of the table, leaning forward on his knuckles in an intimidating power pose. Next to him sat Mr. Gray, a balding man with slicked-back hair in a cheap pinstriped suit. "Take a seat, Joshua," Elijah commanded, pointing to the lone empty chair at the far end of the table. Mr. Gray slid a thick stack of stapled papers across the polished wood. "This is a standard global release and non-disclosure agreement," the lawyer stated in a bored monotone. "It stipulates that you retroactively consent to the property transfer, waive your right to any future civil or criminal litigation regarding the Malibu estate, and agree to cease all harassment of my clients." "And what exactly do I get in return for signing away a $5 million house?" I asked, letting my voice tremble. Elijah smiled a slow, predatory grin. He snapped his fingers. Mr. Gray opened a leather folio and pulled out a crisp cashier's check. Elijah slid it across the table. I looked down. It was a check made out to my name for $50,000. $50,000 for a fully paid-off estate in Malibu. It was exactly 1% of the property value. It was also, coincidentally, roughly the same amount of money they had drained from my college fund years ago, adjusted for inflation. "We know you don't have anywhere to go right now," Chloe chimed in sweetly. "This money will get you a nice, quiet apartment, maybe a modest one-bedroom. It will give you a financial cushion while you seek psychiatric help. If you walk out that door without signing the release agreement, I will cancel the check immediately," Elijah threatened, his tone hardening. "Then my attorney will file a permanent restraining order against you. You will be homeless. You will be tied up in brutal civil litigation for the next decade." I needed to sell this performance completely. If they suspected for even a second that I was in absolute control, Elijah might try to move the stolen funds offshore. I had to let them win the battle today so I could completely annihilate them in the war tomorrow. I let a deep, shuddering breath hitch in my throat. I buried my face in my hands, allowing my shoulders to shake violently. The tears that leaked through my fingers were real, but they were tears of mourning for the family I never actually had. "I'm just so tired," I wept, sounding completely broken. "I just wanted to build something for myself. I wanted you to be proud of me, Dad." The room went completely still. This was exactly what they wanted to hear. It validated their narrative. "Oh, Joshua," Martha sighed, a soft, patronizing sound. "We are proud of you, but you simply don't have the emotional bandwidth to handle real wealth. This is a blessing in disguise." Elijah picked up a gold pen from the table and held it out to me. Just sign the papers, Josh. Take the 50,000. Let us handle the heavy lifting from now on. I reached out my hand, trembling so violently I almost dropped the pen. Mr. Gray quickly flipped the heavy document to the final page. I pressed the pen down and signed my name. I flipped through the pages, initialing exactly where the lawyer pointed. Every stroke of the pen was a nail in their collective coffin. By signing this document, I was legally documenting their intent to defraud. They were locking themselves into the narrative. Mr. Gray snatched the document back and stamped it with his notary seal. It is finalized. Elijah slouched back in his chair with a massive, victorious grin. Grab that check on your way out, he sneered, dropping the caring brother act instantly. And listen, we are throwing a massive housewarming party at the estate this Saturday to celebrate our new portfolio. All of my high-end investors will be there. We'd invite you, but given your current state, it's best you skip it. I picked up the check with shaking fingers and stood up. I'll keep that in mind, I whispered. I walked out of the conference room. The heavy glass doors slid shut behind me. The moment I stepped into the private elevator going down to the parking garage, my posture instantly straightened. The trembling in my hands vanished. A sleek black luxury sedan was idling in the dark garage. I slid into the passenger seat. My lawyer, David, was sitting behind the wheel, tapping away on a secure digital tablet. How was the performance? David asked, his voice crisp. Worthy of an award, I replied, tossing the $50,000 check onto the center console. They bought every second of it. They signed the NDA. David smiled a predatory expression. Perfect. I have some excellent news. Look at this. He held out his tablet. It showed a real-time transaction log. The $4 million wire transfer from the New York bank officially hit Elijah's California account 20 minutes ago. The funds crossed state lines. Federal wire fraud, I said, a deep satisfaction settling in my chest. Exactly, David confirmed. He just invited the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the Internal Revenue Service right into his living room. What about the check? We hold on to it, I said. It's physical evidence of their attempt to extort my compliance. We will bring it to the housewarming party on Saturday. It will be the perfect accessory for when the federal agents kick the doors down. Saturday evening arrived with a flawless, cloudless sky, the kind of evening real estate agents in Malibu charge extra for. The drive up the Pacific Coast Highway was smooth, the rhythmic sound of the ocean waves providing a calming soundtrack to my impending revenge. As my town car turned onto my street, the sheer scale of Elijah's delusion came into full view. The entire block was lined with expensive sports cars and luxury sedans. A private valet service was parking cars on the south lawn. The sound of a live string quartet drifted through the crisp evening air. I stepped out of the car. I wasn't wearing an oversized sweater today. I wore a sharp, custom-tailored charcoal suit. It was the armor of a man who was about to execute the most brutal, legally perfect revenge imaginable. I walked through the massive mahogany doors into the grand foyer. No one stopped me. The catering staff was rushing around with silver trays of champagne. I stepped out through the open French doors onto the expansive back patio. Dozens of people dressed in designer evening wear were mingling around my swimming pool. A massive ice sculpture dominated the center table. Elijah was pacing back and forth near the outdoor bar, wearing a custom tuxedo, barking orders at the event staff like he was a billionaire. I stood at the top of the stone steps for a long moment, just watching them. Then the inevitable ripple effect began. A woman turned and saw me. She nudged her husband. The mindless chatter began to die down. The string quartet faltered, and within seconds the music completely stopped. The silence that fell over the massive party was absolute and deafening. Every single eye was locked on me. I slowly descended the stone steps. Nervous whispers erupted. Elijah froze, his jaw clenched, his eyes wide with a mixture of shock and sudden panic. Before he could move, my father, Thomas, shoved his way aggressively through the wealthy crowd. His face was a mask of pure fury. He grabbed my arm with a punishing grip. "What the hell are you doing here?" Thomas hissed. "You signed the agreement. You took the money. Get out before I have security drag you out." "Take your hand off me, Dad," I said, my voice carrying an icy authority I had never used with him before. He hesitated, then released my arm, stepping back. I reached into my inner jacket pocket and pulled out the thick, gold-foiled invitation Chloe had arrogantly mailed to my hotel just to mock me. I held it up high. "I was invited," I replied loudly, ensuring my voice carried across the silent patio. "Chloe specifically asked me to come." Thomas stared at the heavy gold cardstock, his mouth opening and closing silently. His argument was completely destroyed. In that brief moment of his absolute confusion, I stepped around him. I didn't walk toward Elijah. Instead, I walked to the elevated wooden platform where the DJ, Julian, was standing behind a massive soundboard. I climbed the stairs, picked up the wireless microphone resting on the edge of his table, and turned to face the massive crowd. I tapped the microphone twice. The sharp, amplified thumps echoed loudly across the lawn. "Good evening, everyone," I said, my voice projecting smoothly through the high-end speakers. "Welcome to Malibu. I wanted to take a brief moment to make a special toast to our host tonight." I looked directly at Elijah. He was rigid as a board. "Elijah," I continued, my tone incredibly cheerful, "you have always told this family that you are a financial visionary, and this week you truly proved it. You executed a real estate transaction so bold, so breathtakingly aggressive, that it belongs in a textbook." Whispers rippled through the crowd. The business contacts Elijah had invited began nodding, smiling in agreement, completely misinterpreting my sarcasm for genuine praise. "You saw a $5 million estate sitting here with dead equity," I projected into the microphone, "and you took decisive action. You transferred the property, leveraged the asset, and secured $4 million in cash-out refinance funds in record time. It takes a very special kind of entrepreneur to pull off a move like that without conducting a single standard title search." The smiles on the faces of his investors suddenly faltered. Buying a luxury property without a title search wasn't visionary. It was financial suicide. "Turn that off right now," Chloe screamed hysterically, scrambling up the wooden stairs, lunging toward me to snatch the microphone. I calmly sidestepped her. "Careful, Chloe," I warned over the speakers. "We don't want to raise your blood pressure. I am simply giving your husband the grand public recognition he so desperately craves." "Joshua, please stop talking," Elijah yelled from the grass, his voice cracking with genuine terror. "You see," I said into the microphone, looking out at the sea of bewildered faces. "When Elijah and my father forged my signature on a quitclaim deed to steal this house, they thought they had outsmarted a simple accountant. What they failed to realize is that I never actually owned this property in my personal name. It was owned by the Horizon Management Trust. And as a forensic accountant, I specifically structured that trust to carry a legally binding $3.5 million federal tax lien." The crowd collectively gasped. Several sharply dressed investors immediately set their champagne glasses down. They knew exactly what a federal tax lien meant. Elijah stopped walking. His arms fell limply to his sides. His face lost every ounce of color, transforming into a sickly pale mask of shock. "For those of you who don't understand real estate law," I continued smoothly, "a quitclaim deed transfers a property along with every single debt attached to it. So when Elijah rushed his little forgery, he legally volunteered to personally absorb my $3.5 million tax debt to the Internal Revenue Service. He thought he was getting a free mansion. Instead, he legally signed up to pay millions to the federal government." "You're lying," Thomas shouted, his voice cracking with panic. "I processed the paperwork myself. There was no lien. If you had hired a real title agent instead of bribing your corrupt notary friend, you would have seen the filing, Dad," I replied calmly. "But it gets so much better. Elijah didn't just transfer the house. He immediately used it as collateral to secure a $4 million cash-out refinance from a bank in New York. You took a property that already owed $3.5 million to the government, hid that debt, and used the compromised asset to borrow $4 million in cash. The gasps from the audience were louder this time. People physically took steps away from Elijah. You have defrauded a major financial institution, I stated, my voice echoing like thunder. You have committed federal wire fraud. And because you transferred those stolen funds across state lines, you have officially invited the highest levels of federal law enforcement right into your bank accounts. That's impossible, Elijah whispered loudly, shaking his head. The bank approved the loan. The money is sitting in my account right now. You are just a jealous liar. I am a millionaire. Are you sure about that? I asked, offering him a devastating, pitying smile. Because the Internal Revenue Service was notified of your massive new tax liability yesterday. And when the federal government realizes a debtor suddenly has $4 million in liquid cash sitting in a California checking account, they don't send a polite letter. They seize everything. I suggest you check your balances, Elijah. Check your business accounts. Check the credit cards you used to pay for this extravagant party. Prove me wrong right now in front of everyone. Elijah stood paralyzed. The silence on the patio was so profound I could hear the massive ice sculpture melting, water dripping onto the stone pavers. Slowly, his hands shaking violently, he reached into his custom tuxedo jacket and pulled out his smartphone. He tapped the screen, opening his primary banking application. He blinked once, twice. He swiped his thumb across the glass, refreshing the page. A strange, choked sound escaped his throat, like a man who had just been punched directly in the stomach. He tapped another icon, opening his business accounts. Then the credit card apps. What is it? Chloe demanded, her voice shrill. Tell him he's lying. Show everyone. Elijah didn't answer her. He slowly turned the phone around so Chloe could see the screen. I didn't need to be standing next to them to know exactly what it said. Every single account displayed a bright red banner across the top. Frozen, federal order. Chloe let out a piercing, hysterical shriek. The wealthy investors and business contacts didn't need to hear another word. They recognized a sinking ship when they saw one. They immediately began backing away from the outdoor bar, placing their expensive champagne glasses down on whatever flat surface they could find. They were quietly and quickly moving toward the side gates, desperate to distance themselves from a man who had just been publicly marked by the Internal Revenue Service. Nobody wants to be collateral damage in a federal tax raid. Before anyone could formulate a coherent thought, a loud, mechanical grinding noise shattered the tense atmosphere. It came from the front of the house. The heavy, unmistakable rumble of a large diesel engine echoed down the long driveway, followed by the screech of metal scraping against pavement. I calmly descended the wooden steps of the DJ platform and followed the crowd. Elijah and Chloe sprinted past me, pushing their own guests out of the way in a blind panic. When we reached the expansive front driveway, the scene was absolute perfection. A massive heavy-duty flatbed tow truck was parked diagonally across the entrance. A burly man in a reflective safety vest, Christian, was currently operating a hydraulic winch. The thick steel cable was already securely hooked to the front axle of Elijah's brand-new, matte black Lamborghini Urus. "Hey!" Elijah screamed, waving his arms wildly as he sprinted down the driveway. "What do you think you are doing? Take that hook off my car right now. I own that vehicle. I paid cash for it on Tuesday." Christian didn't even flinch. He casually pulled a clipboard from the passenger seat of his rig and held it out. He looked bored. "I am executing a federal asset seizure order. Buddy?" Christian said loudly so the gathering crowd could hear. The purchase was made with frozen funds tied to a massive federal tax lien. The dealership recalled the title this afternoon at the request of the government. "This car belongs to the feds now." Elijah stopped dead in his tracks. He stared at the clipboard, then looked up at the Lamborghini as the winch groaned slowly, dragging the $250,000 luxury vehicle up the steep metal ramp of the tow truck. The expensive tires squeaked loudly against the steel. It was the physical sound of his entire fake empire being hauled away. Elijah fell to his knees on the pavement, completely broken. His expensive velvet blazer gathered dirt from my driveway. "Get up, Elijah," Chloe cried, pulling frantically at his shoulder. "Do something. Call the police. They can't just take our property." "Actually, they absolutely can," a deep, commanding voice announced from the edge of the driveway. The crowd parted instinctively. A man I recognized immediately stepped forward. It was Special Agent Nathan, but he wasn't wearing his tactical vest just yet. He was wearing a sharp-tailored tuxedo, looking exactly like one of the high-end investors Elijah had invited to impress. Next to him stood Investigator Samuel from the IRS, wearing an elegant dark suit. They had been standing in the crowd the entire time, drinking sparkling water and watching the public confession unfold. Agent Nathan reached inside his tuxedo jacket and pulled out a leather wallet. He flipped it open, revealing the gleaming gold badge of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Beside him, Samuel produced his own credentials for the Internal Revenue Service. The collective gasp from the crowd this time was raw, genuine terror. The wealthy elites suddenly realized they were standing squarely in the middle of a federal sting operation. "Elijah," Agent Nathan said, his voice carrying the undeniable weight of federal authority. "Stand up and put your hands behind your back." Elijah didn't move. He was completely paralyzed. Chloe, however, completely lost her mind. "No!" she screamed, stepping in front of her husband like a human shield. "You have no right to be here. This is a private event. You can't just harass us because my jealous brother-in-law told you lies." Agent Nathan didn't argue with her. He simply raised his right hand and gave a sharp tactical hand signal. Instantly, the entire dynamic of the party shifted. At least a dozen people I had assumed were just catering staff suddenly sprang into action. The bartender reached under the counter and pulled out a heavy radio. Waiters carrying silver trays set them down and unzipped their catering vests, revealing dark blue windbreakers with bright yellow lettering across the back. FBI and IRS. "The perimeter is secure," one of the undercover agents announced loudly over the radio. "The private residence you are referring to is currently an active federal crime scene," Investigator Samuel told Chloe, his voice colder than the melting ice sculpture by the pool. "And we have federal warrants signed by a magistrate judge authorizing us to secure this property, freeze all associated assets, and apprehend the primary suspect. Now, step aside, ma'am, or you will be charged with interfering with a federal investigation." Chloe scrambled backward, completely abandoning her husband the second she realized her own freedom was at risk. Two federal agents grabbed Elijah by the arms and hauled him to his feet. He was dead weight. "Elijah," Agent Nathan recited firmly, pulling a pair of heavy steel handcuffs from his belt. "You are under arrest for federal wire fraud, bank fraud, and aggravated identity theft. You have the right to remain silent." The sharp metallic click of the handcuffs locking around Elijah's wrists echoed loudly over the driveway. It was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of a 30-year cycle of toxic family manipulation finally snapping in half. "This is a mistake," Elijah babbled, tears streaming down his face, ruining his perfectly manicured image. "I didn't steal anything. Thomas told me it was legal. My father told me he handled the paperwork. He is a banker. He told me it was a clean transfer." Before the agents could shut the heavy door of the federal SUV on Elijah, my father charged forward, sweating profusely. "Officers, please. My son is clearly trying to deflect blame. I am a respected former bank executive. I simply facilitated a standard family transfer." Special Agent Nathan looked at my father with a gaze so cold it could freeze the Pacific Ocean. "Protecting assets by coercing a registered notary into stamping a fraudulent document without the primary signatory present? Because we already paid a visit to your old friend at the bank this afternoon. He confessed to everything the moment we mentioned federal conspiracy charges." Thomas stopped breathing. Investigator Samuel stepped forward holding a thick manila envelope. "Thomas," Samuel said, his voice perfectly crisp, "as a former executive of a federally insured commercial bank, you are fully aware of the penalties for banking fraud. By actively participating in a conspiracy to defraud a financial institution, you have violated the core terms of your severance and retirement agreements. The federal government is officially seizing your entire banking pension. You will not receive another dime for the rest of your life. The words hit my father like a physical blow. His entire identity and financial security were tied to that massive pension. He clutched his chest, his face turning a dangerous shade of gray. He began gasping for air, his knees buckling beneath him. "My pension!" he wheezed, his eyes wide with absolute terror. "You can't take my pension. I worked for 40 years. Thomas collapsed onto the paved driveway, clutching his heart. The federal agents didn't panic. One of the undercover medics stepped forward, calmly checking his pulse and radioing for an ambulance. It was a classic panic attack brought on by the sudden, crushing weight of accountability. I watched the man who had stolen my college fund gasping on the concrete, stripped of his wealth, his reputation, and his freedom. I felt absolutely nothing for him. The red and blue lights of the federal SUV illuminated the driveway as it slowly rolled away, carrying the fake millionaire toward a very real federal prison cell. The massive housewarming party was abandoned. The red and blue lights of the ambulance pulsed against the manicured hedges of my driveway, casting long, erratic shadows across the stone pavers. The deafening silence of the abandoned party was broken only by the crackle of the paramedics' radios and the heavy, ragged breathing of my father. I stood perfectly still near the grand mahogany entrance of my home, my charcoal suit sharp against the cool ocean breeze. I watched the emergency medical technicians carefully lift Thomas onto a collapsible stretcher. He was conscious but completely unresponsive, his eyes wide and staring blankly up at the dark, cloudless Malibu sky. The absolute reality of his shattered banking legacy had crushed him physically. He knew his reputation, his freedom, and the financial security he worshipped were gone forever. They wheeled him toward the back of the ambulance. That was when my mother turned her attention away from the stretcher and looked directly at me. For my entire 33 years of life, Martha had looked at me with varying degrees of disappointment, annoyance, or calculated manipulation. She saw me as a walking ATM, a safety net for her golden child, Elijah. But tonight, as she stared at me across the debris of the driveway, her eyes held absolute, primal terror. The arrogant matriarch who had slapped me across the face just days earlier at her barbecue was completely gone. Her expensive diamond necklace looked heavy and absurd against her pale, shaking skin. She took a hesitant step toward me, then another, and then she was practically running. "Joshua!" Martha cried out, her voice cracking with a desperate, ragged edge. "Joshua, please, you must stop this. You have to talk to them." She closed the distance between us, and to my absolute astonishment, her knees buckled. My mother, the woman who cared more about her country club reputation than her own son's well-being, fell hard onto the concrete right at my feet. She grabbed the fabric of my suit trousers with trembling hands, looking up at me with thick, black mascara tears streaming down her face. "You have to tell the federal agents it was a misunderstanding," Martha begged, her words tumbling out in a frantic, hyperventilating rush. "Tell them you gave Elijah permission. Tell them your father was just trying to help consolidate the family assets. If you don't stop this right now, they will put your father in prison. He will die in there, Joshua. He has a heart condition. They took his pension. We will have absolutely nothing left." I looked down at the woman who happily drained my college fund to buy Elijah a lavish wedding. I looked at the woman who watched her husband forge my signature to steal my $5 million home and celebrated it with an upscale party. I looked at the woman who had spent my entire life making sure I knew my salary and my success were only valuable if they were being handed over to my brother. "It wasn't a misunderstanding, Mom," I said, my voice completely devoid of warmth, sympathy, or anger. It was just an icy, undeniable fact. It was a calculated, deliberate federal crime. You all sat in a room and decided that my life, my hard work, and my property belonged to you. You thought you could just take what was mine because you decided I didn't deserve it. But we are your family. Martha sobbed, burying her face against my legs, resorting to the only weapon she had left in her arsenal. We are your blood. You cannot do this to your own blood. Chloe is pregnant. She needs her husband. I need your father. Please, Joshua. I am begging you. I will do anything. We will give the house back. We will apologize. Just call the agents and tell them you made a mistake. I gently but firmly stepped back, forcing her to release my suit. She slumped forward onto the pavement, a pathetic, weeping heap of ruined entitlement. Chloe stood a few feet away, her arms wrapped tightly around her own stomach, watching my mother beg. Chloe didn't say a single word in my defense, nor did she join Martha in pleading. I could see the cold, hard calculus working behind Chloe's eyes. She was already mentally distancing herself from the sinking ship. I knew right then that she was already planning the divorce. She was figuring out how to file for sole custody of their unborn child, so she wouldn't be dragged down by a federal indictment. There is no loyalty among thieves when the federal government kicks the door down. I reached inside my suit jacket. I pulled out the crisp, rectangular cashier's check they had forced me to accept at Mr. Gray's sleazy law office just a few days ago. The $50,000 they thought would buy my silence and erase a multi-million-dollar theft. I held the check up so both Martha and Chloe could clearly see the numbers under the bright porch lights. You can't give the house back, I stated with absolute clarity, because it was never yours to begin with, and I cannot stop the federal government from prosecuting a wire fraud case that Elijah thoroughly documented on a bank server. I gripped the edges of the heavy paper check. With one smooth, deliberate motion, I tore it perfectly in half. Martha gasped, her eyes widening as the sound of tearing paper echoed in the quiet driveway. I let the two torn pieces of the check flutter from my fingers. They drifted down through the cool night air, landing softly on the concrete right next to my mother's trembling hands. Use this to hire a decent lawyer, I told her, my voice barely a whisper. You are going to need every single penny. I turned my back on my weeping mother and walked down the long driveway toward my waiting town car, leaving the ruins of my family behind in the ocean breeze. I slept that night in my downtown hotel suite with a profound, unbroken peace I had not felt since I was a little boy. The next few weeks were a relentless, merciless legal bloodbath. I watched the fallout from the safety of my corporate office, receiving regular updates from my attorney, David. Elijah spent his first weekend in a federal holding cell. Because he had $4 million of stolen cash sitting in frozen accounts, the federal magistrate judge deemed him a massive flight risk and denied him bail entirely. He traded his custom maroon velvet blazer for a standard-issue orange jumpsuit. Mr. Gray, his arrogant, slick-haired attorney, immediately dropped him as a client the exact second he realized the retainer check was going to bounce. Elijah was assigned a public defender who had roughly 5 minutes to review his case before his arraignment. My father survived his heart attack, but his life as he knew it was entirely over. True to his word, Investigator Samuel from the IRS initiated the immediate seizure of Thomas's banking pension. It turned out that the promotion Thomas had used to bribe his notary friend violated a dozen different banking regulations. The bank wanted nothing to do with him. Thomas was facing decades in federal prison for conspiracy and bank fraud. He managed to post bail using the remaining equity in the Calabasas house, but the legal fees were draining that dry by the hour. Martha and Chloe were left completely destitute. Martha spent her days frantically calling every distant relative she had ever ignored, begging for loans that nobody was willing to give her. Chloe, acting exactly as I predicted, packed her expensive designer bags, moved back in with her own parents, and officially filed for divorce. She threw Elijah entirely under the bus, claiming she had no idea he was committing fraud and demanding full custody of the baby. They were tearing each other apart for scraps. The fake empire was completely leveled. About a month after the raid, the police tape and federal seals were finally removed from my property. I drove my car up the steep driveway of my Malibu estate. The front gate was unlocked. I slid my newly minted key into the deadbolt and pushed the heavy mahogany doors open. I stepped inside. The house smelled incredibly wrong. It smelled like stale champagne, cheap designer perfume, and desperate greed. The gaudy, hideous velvet sectionals Chloe had purchased with the stolen money were still sitting in my living room. The cheap, poorly constructed kitchen cabinets they tried to install over my imported Italian marble were half-finished. The entire estate felt deeply contaminated by their brief, toxic presence. They had tried to erase me from my own sanctuary. I pulled out my phone and called a premium industrial cleaning service. I didn't just call a standard maid service. I called a crew that specializes in deep chemical fumigation and biohazard removal. Within 2 hours, a fleet of white utility vans pulled up my driveway. A crew of men wearing full heavy-duty hazmat suits marched into the house. I met the foreman in the driveway and handed him a very specific list of instructions. "Rip out the velvet furniture and take it to the county dump," I ordered. "Tear down those new kitchen cabinets and smash them. I want you to scrub every single inch of the hardwood floors, the walls, the baseboards, and the ceiling. Leave absolutely no trace of the people who were here." I paid the foreman triple his usual rate to do something extreme. I ordered them to wrap the entire $5 million estate in a massive, brightly colored striped fumigation tent. I stood on the front lawn, holding my leather tote bag. Inside the bag, safely tucked away in a velvet pouch, was the wooden urn containing my grandfather's ashes. The same urn Elijah had callously tossed into a cardboard box. I watched as the heavy canvas dropped over the roof of the house, sealing it off from the outside world. It was a literal and symbolic cleansing. The toxic infection that had plagued my life for 33 years was finally being exterminated. The poison was being drawn out of the walls, out of the floors, and out of my life entirely. As I watched the thick chemical fog begin to fill the sealed tent through the heavy plastic windows, I realized something fundamental about the nature of family. Society conditions us from a very young age to believe that shared DNA is an unbreakable, sacred contract. We are told that blood is thicker than water. We are taught that we have a mandatory obligation to endure disrespect, financial abuse, and emotional manipulation simply because the person hurting us shares our last name. We are conditioned to smile through the pain and keep the peace at all costs. We are told to forgive the unforgivable. But as a forensic accountant, I view the world through a much colder, more realistic lens. I look at ledgers. I look at investments, liabilities, and returns. For my entire life, I had invested my love, my money, my salary, and my sanity into a family unit that yielded absolutely nothing but massive emotional debt. They saw my kindness as a weakness to be leveraged. They thought my silence, my willingness to avoid conflict, was an open invitation to steal my entire future. They forgot that independence is not a gift you are handed. Independence is a fortress. It is meticulously built, brick by brick, dollar by dollar, late night by late night, until you are strong enough to defend your own borders. The true cost of absolute freedom is the willingness to walk away from the people who drag you down, even if you have known them your entire life. There is a beautiful, undeniable, sweet logic to my profession. Numbers never lie, and debts always come due. My family thought they could forge a new reality with a cheap black pen. But in the end, the math caught up with them. The ledger was finally balanced. The sun was beginning to set over the Pacific Ocean, casting brilliant streaks of orange and deep purple across the horizon. The fumigation tent had been removed days ago. The house was spotless, smelling faintly of citrus and industrial cleaners. My original, meticulously chosen furniture had been restored from the secure storage facility where Elijah had dumped it. I was sitting on the expansive back balcony of my master bedroom, listening to the rhythmic crashing of the waves against the shore. Resting on the glass table next to me was the wooden urn. I reached out and rested my hand on the smooth, polished wood. I thought about my grandfather. I thought about the day of his funeral. I was a teenager, standing in the back of the church in a poorly fitting suit, watching my parents completely ignore his legacy while actively trying to figure out how to divide his modest assets. My grandfather was the only person in that sprawling, toxic family tree who ever looked at me and saw a human being instead of a financial resource. He was a quiet, hardworking man. He was the one who originally set up that college fund for me. He knew exactly what Thomas and Martha were capable of, and he tried to protect me. His true inheritance wasn't the money they eventually stole from me. His true inheritance was the work ethic, the quiet resilience, and the sharp mind he passed down. He taught me to observe carefully, to plan meticulously, and to never let anyone loud and arrogant convince me that I was small. I looked out at the water. The storm was completely over. Elijah was sitting in a federal penitentiary awaiting trial, facing a mandatory minimum sentence that would ensure he spent the best years of his life behind bars. Thomas was disgraced, broke, and legally barred from ever stepping foot inside a financial institution again. Martha was living in a cramped rental apartment, completely stripped of her social standing, forced to face the reality of the monsters she had created and enabled. They had tried to destroy me to build their fake empire, and in doing so, they provided the exact tools required for their own destruction. They handed me the rope, and I simply allowed them to tie the knot themselves. I picked up my cup of black coffee, took a slow sip, and let the cool ocean breeze wash over my face. I was 33 years old, entirely self-made, and finally truly alone. And it was the most beautiful, liberating feeling in the world. If there is one profound lesson I want you to take away from my story, it is this. Do not ever let society, guilt, or manipulation convince you that biological relation grants someone an all-access pass to disrespect you. We are taught to sacrifice our peace for the sake of family. But a true family protects your peace. They do not view it as an obstacle to their own greed. If you are the person doing the hard work, earning your salary, and building your life while your relatives expect you to foot the bill for their bad choices, you are not being a good sibling or a good child. You are being held as a financial hostage. Audit your own relationships. Look closely at the people who claim to love you. Do they celebrate your success? Or do they immediately calculate how your success can benefit them? The courage to walk away from toxic people, even if they share your DNA, is the absolute highest form of self-care and self-respect. You have the right to build an impenetrable fortress around your life and lock the gates. Thank you so much for listening to my story today. I would love to hear your thoughts. What is the biggest lesson you are taking away from this? Let me know down in the comments, or simply comment the word good, so I know you found value in this journey. Keep building your empire, protect your peace fiercely, and remember, never sign a legal document with a cheap black pen.